One of the great things about Alberta is all the wild open spaces. And while it may seem uncommon, there still is a call of the wild here in Alberta, just as there still is a fur trade and Albertans who live on the land and spend their time in the wilderness with no coffee shop or cell phone signal for hundreds of kilometers. One such Albertan is Donald Langkamp and his wife Nikeeya. They have a YouTube channel called The Way to Native Chronicles, showcasing their time in the wildlands of Alberta as fur trappers. Donald, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
So let's get started, Donald. How did the two of you get started in spending time in the wild areas of our province?
Well, a lot of it stems from the fact that my wife, she's First Nations from northern Alberta, Denetha, and we met in 1975 and got married. And she comes from a family that was raised, made their entire income basically from trapping. So her father was uh, a, a trapper, very skilled one, had his own trap line. They grew up in log houses. A lot of stuff that seems very ancient was not all that long ago. So coming from that background, when we got married, she actually had her treaty rights taken away from her uh, because back in '75, if a non-native man married a native woman, then she would lose all her rights. So
Wow.
that resulted in about 10 years sort of turmoil of being basically not a band member anymore. And in 1985, I think it was, Bill C-10 reestablished the women's rights to retain their native status. So she almost kind of went back to it with a vengeance to really help get herself established again in her culture. And I've always been very uh, much for that too. So we've engaged in hunting and later on in trapping, and it's been very important for also keeping her native crafts alive. She has a she sells makes moccasins and native crafts for many people, and tans her own moose hides using the traditional method. So all these things, they require those natural products from the wilds, like the furs for the fur trim and stuff like that. So we got to the point where we were saying, we should just get our own trap line and trap our own pelts. And we've already been for many years getting our own moose every year. So it's really keeping the culture alive a lot. And as far as trapping goes, I believe the Alberta government really tries to uh, promote the retention of native culture by making sure that all the trap lines don't go to other people. So it wasn't too hard to get a trap line.
And so that's some interesting history that you just shared there. But Donald, how long have you and your wife been working your trap line?
We've been doing trap lines for about 5 years. This one that we have, we've had it for 3 years though. So we're actually still in very much of a building up stage in it. And the trap line, because it's trap line that we have, is located about pretty much 3 kilometers off any main road. So that makes access to it quite challenging, and that's sort of where it ties in with the government's decision to start removing all these roads that are there, because we got a cabin now 3 kilometers into the bush, and it's quite challenging to get to. We're not getting any younger. My wife's 71 and I'm 67, so we have to trek through some substantial rough territory to get to our cabin now, and which is made a whole lot easier if you can drive in there, because there is a road going right up to the cabin.
Now, you work with furs as a fur trapper, and I remember as a child living in Winnipeg, there would be retail stores that sold furs, fur coats, but I haven't seen anything in retail for decades. Is there still a strong market for furs?
Yeah, the market for furs. That's a really good point you bring up, because uh, like when my wife's father was earning a living for the family back in before the 1970s. He passed away just a few years ago, and he was 99. Uh, Trapping was really quite a lucrative industry. He made really good money. being a trapper. So I mean, they weren't rich, but you could make a good living. And nowadays, the market is so depressed. I think a lot due to social pressures and things like that. That you can hardly well, you can't earn a living doing it anymore, except for a um, few exceptions. But even those are being wiped out. Like there used to be a company that used a Canadian company that used coyote furs, and under pressure from the woke crowd, I guess, or whatever you call them, they finally canceled that too. They get pressured into using fake fur, and everybody says it's just as good, but it's not nearly the same thing as real fur. So these types of things have really crushed a lot of native communities in their form of ability to have employment because these places are remote and it's not like you can get a job at a 7-Eleven. It's really been unfortunate.
So you've mentioned how social pressures have really affected your industry. Donald, have you had any run-ins with animal rights activists or organizations such as PETA, and what have those interactions been like?
No, I guess maybe they're scared of me. I don't know. They never have, to be honest. Um, and but I mean, we don't run in the same circles either. So I'm sure if made a big show of it downtown or something like that, I would get some interactions. In our case, what we do is and it's partly true, I think, because there is some, even among such people, there is a respect for native culture and the rights of indigenous people. And my wife, being First Nations, we use these hides. We don't sell them. We use them to make native crafts, which is really an important aspect of helping to uh, preserve and pass on the native culture. So maybe we're given a little bit of a break that way.
So it sounds like some activists know that there is a line between in preserving indigenous culture and social justice. Now, you mentioned before the interview that there's been advancements in your industry that makes the fur industry appeal to European markets. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, that's a good point because yeah, it's not like the trappers have been blind to the concerns of Canadians, and even more so, being very conscious of the concerns of the rest of the world, Europe in particular. I would say, for you have to deal with the reality that many people don't want to see animals suffer, and truthfully, trappers don't want to see animals suffer either. So, in order to keep this industry alive, we have had to draw up guidelines and pass laws that require every trapper to be trained, pass a course before he can be a trapper, and we are then trained in the use of mandated methods of capturing animals in a way that doesn't make them suffer. So if I had like the leg hold traps are a very common one, and they're looked down a lot on. But the leg hold traps that we use nowadays are meant to just hold the animal. So I can take a leg hold trap that we use, that we have to use now, according to law, just stick my hand in it and let it snap on my hand. It's not going to hurt me. All it's going to do is just going to grab my hand so that I can't get it away. And that combined with the fact that the laws also mandate that you have to check your traps every day, that ensures that an animal's not going to suffer. So they're not going to suffer from the trap holding their leg. It's not like a lot of people have this misconception and it was that way a bit in the old days, that animals would suffer a lot, but they don't anymore if we follow the proper procedures. And we've had to follow those procedures uh, quite we probably want to anyways, but uh, out of necessity because the Europeans would not buy furs from us anymore if they didn't think the furs were harvested in an ethical manner. So this is this industry has really changed from top to bottom. But even in spite of that, we still have the depressed prices in the fur market because that impression is out there. So we're doing the best we can, but the truth is sometimes just getting its pants on when the lie is run around the world already, right?
So it sounds like there's still a lot of like misinformation and really like outdated stigma related to fur trapping.
Yeah, yeah. It's basically outdated information that is leading people astray, and so I'm not ascribing malice to everyone who disagrees with trapping. I think they're just quite often uninformed. They don't realize how much this industry has changed and how much emphasis we put on proper and safe trapping.
And you also talked about keeping trapping alive. So do you feel that these skills are important to share with a younger generation? You do have a lot of subscribers on your YouTube channel.
Yes, it's very important to share these skills. Also, as a way of it gives you a purpose for being outdoors too, because it's one thing to sit around the house and look at nice nature shows and stuff like that, but it's another thing to actually understand the animal so well that you sort of know what they're going to do next, and that really draws you into a closer connection with nature. Uh, Also, for First Nations people, uh, it's something that we really have to work on getting them involved in and continuing on, which is unfortunately really hurt by the fact that the money to be made off hers is so low now. But um, from a cultural background, like trapping, the trap lines that were established before the treaties were written really established the territories of the various native peoples in Canada. That's how we based. We had to we when the treaties were being figured out, the government had to go back and see, well, whose trap line was this, and they had them all laid out and everything already. So all these things are just so central and crucial to our history and culture as well, especially in the case of First Nations.
Now, one of the videos that was posted on your YouTube channel in July, it had over like 200,000 views. You talk about the Trudeau Liberals' push to ban not only handguns, but also rifles that are primarily used for hunting. Now, as a person who regularly uses firearms, what concerns you the most about the current and future bans of these tools?
Well, that's a big one. Yeah, I mean that is something that's such a frustration for Canadian gun owners and people who spend time in the outdoors, because we feel like there's just a total disconnect between the urban centers like Toronto and Montreal and the West. It's really feeding into the whole um, Western alienation thing, where uh, people don't appreciate that for us, rifles and even handguns have a use. Like as a trapper, I have an authorization to use a handgun because you can't lug a rifle around. So there's a real use for handguns, both for dispatching animals and also for personal protection, because you're carrying stuff around in the bush and you're working with your hands. You can't have a rifle close by. So uh, for for all of our rights to be basically stomped on for the sake of some idiotic gangbangers on the Toronto streets and stuff like that, it's uh, it's really uh, it's really frustrating because on the one hand we're always saying, well, we don't demonize a whole class of people, like let's say call all Muslims terrorists because there's a few bad actors among them, and that's right, we shouldn't do that. But then if there's a few idiots that are using guns illegally, which no law is going to prevent them from doing anyways, then you're going to paint with a broad brush all gun owners in Canada as being dangerous, and we have to be protected from. The government is really just relying on fear tactics and picking out somebody to be a boogeyman, as I've mentioned in my videos before. So they have such a bad situation politically as they look ahead to what's going to happen the next election. They have to uh, pick somebody to rally everybody against, and it's really a sad state of affairs. The rifles that they're thinking of banning, or that they have banned already, uh, and are going to ban, are going to include a lot of these rifles that the First Nations people use too. And I think we have to always keep in mind the fact that these treaties that we signed with First Nations included the guarantee to continue hunting and practicing their traditional ways, which is very important because they actually are stakeholders in in uh, in saying what happens for destruction of the environment, but also they have a right to have uh, firearms in order to hunt. Some people say, "Oh, they can go back to bows and arrows," but they don't know their history. Treaties were signed at times when uh, First Nations, at least around here, they all had rifles and stuff already. So there's a whole there's a lot of frustration here among the people I know that we've invested a lot of money in our handguns and our rifles and shotguns, and that the government can come along and take away property that has been lawfully obtained sets a precedent that is really scary. The Trudeau has already shown his willingness to step into our bank accounts. That should be a red flag for all of us. That he can just freeze our bank accounts, do all kinds of things if they don't agree with us politically. So now we have the guns coming along. They're going to take those away. They're, once the government should be around to protect people's personal property, not to take it away. And if they can do this, even those people out there that don't have guns, they should be worried.
Well, Donald, thank you so much for your perspective, as well as an Indigenous perspective on fur trapping, as well as also gun control. But that's unfortunately that's all the time we have for today, and I only got through a few of the questions. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, and thank you as well. I really appreciated talking to you.
That was Donald Langkamp, and you can watch more from him and his wife Nikeeya out on their trapline on their YouTube channel, The Way to Native Chronicles. I'm Naveen Day, and on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.